and welcome to From Here to Eternity, a Gateway Seminary podcast about the nations. My name's Phil. I'm the host. I'm a professor of missions here at Gateway Seminary. Until recently, I lived overseas for around 20 or so years or so. In this podcast, we address topics related to the cross-cultural spread of the gospel from here in California, across the world, and in the U.S. Today we have Sam Rahmani. He is an Iranian refugee who lives in Southeast Asia. He's working on a PhD and he teaches in Persian theological education. So he's very much involved with the theological education of Christians, Iranian Christians. Thank you, Sam, for coming, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting and having me here. I just wanted to say, as the Iranian custom, I want to say hi to everyone who's listening to this podcast, and definitely a joy to be able to talk about some of the topics we have today.
Great, Sam. Can we first just start off can you just share your testimony, how you came to faith in Christ, where you, if you could talk about where the general area where you were living. I mean, you were living in Iran. Can you talk about how, as an Iranian, you came to faith in Christ? What did you convert out of? Many people. Can you talk about a little bit about your faith before, and just go from there?
Sure. So, I was born in a maybe a middle class family in Tehran, where I grew up for the most part of my young age. I was there. And so I was born in a non-practicing Bahai family, kind of like a nominal family who does not practice their own religion. However, the rest of my extended family were very much involved with their own religion. So I was born in Tehran, in a neighborhood which is called, I mean, the neighborhood I grew up with, because we moved a couple of times, but I was born and raised in Zafar Street, some nice neighborhood that I still love and cherish, from Tehran. And yeah, that's where we started basically.
Okay. So you grew up Baha'i instead of Muslim. Now, um, in many people outside of Iran who are not as familiar with the Persian speaking world don't really understand what Baha'ism is, and most people think people in Iran are all Muslim, but you were never Muslim. You were Baha'i.
Yeah. So s- yeah. So as I was born, I again, my parents were not very involved with religion. The only thing I can remember from my father in the past was that he was always laughing at people who are religious in a agnostic way. He was like, "Huh, these people think that such and such is very important," and so, but at the same time, as I was a little child, every opportunity my grandparents would pull me aside and say, "You're gonna grow up and not be like your parents, be a religious person." And so that was the funny part of it. But yeah, that's the part. Yeah.
Okay, so then how? I mean, you came to faith, and then from being a Baha'i to being a Christian, and then how did that lead you to leaving the country?
So the story is a little different. I have a wonderful cousin who's probably a kind of an ideologist and philosopher for some of the movements that he's involved. Now, probably, at least at the time, more involved with communism or liking those things. And so when I was 16 years old, he took on great task of mentoring me to be a good atheist. So, so he was like, "I'm going to give you starting from simple philosophy books. From I read the book in Farsi. It called The World of Sufi or something like that, and then I started reading Brian Magee philosophy books and all those stuff. So very soon, as a probably teenager, I became atheist, and that atheism was led by a constant challenge of go read this book, come let's have a conversation, think about this and think about that, and so it was profoundly designed to lead me to be someone different, to be someone very much the focus was on the mind. So I started reading then, and then I remember there were three books by Hegel that were like purple books and thick books, and I started reading. The first round, I was like, I'm very confused. He was like, okay, that's good, let's continue. And then we continued reading those books, and we continued those journeys, and then I got to other parts, and obviously as a young probably any young man would like. In some ways, I read Nietzsche and I was so impressed with that, and so I was like, "Oh, this is really good stuff." And I remember to the rest of my testimony. In some ways, I always laughed at Kierkegaard. I was like, "What do you say along this journey?" But that's a different story. So I took on those. Philosophical things, and I pretty much obviously I couldn't live in the country. I think it's a part of our family thing, I guess. Everybody lives around somewhere in the world. Literally all my cousins are spreading everywhere in the world. I have cousins in all parts of the world. So I started moving out of Iran. First I went to India. By this time I'm like 26, 25, maybe 24, 5. And so from 16 started this journey and path, and obviously I got my first bachelor from Tehran University in a very high ranking system. I got a bachelor in music. I had a very, because they have an entry exam which is nationwide, very important, and I was a very high rank on there. And so and everybody wanted me to study something very impressive, and I chose music, and to myself it was very impressive because I was obsessed with Schopenhauer at that time, so I was thinking that should be very impressive for a person to invest his life you know to philosophy. So then, obviously, after that, I moved out of the country. I wanted to continue my education, maybe in Chennai, India. Went to a few cities, lived a few months around India, then moved to Singapore, and thinking maybe that would be a better option for me. But actually, Singapore was just too fast and too expensive for me. So I found the middle ground, which was Malaysia. And so I landed in this country, and that's the beginning of the journey. But then my faith started at that time when I came here. The first time I went to church, and I was almost counting myself a very knowledgeable person on ancient texts, and thinking that I read few books, and perhaps Gilgamesh or whatever makes me an expert on Middle Eastern religious texts. And I've read Quran, obviously, because in Iran there is no school for Bahai. Bahai people are persecuted for their faith, and there is no chance for them to go any other school. If you want to go to school, you have to go to a Muslim school, and you have to register as a Muslim. You cannot be Bahai, so you don't have a right to do that. So that's how I ended up the whole journey. Um, Studied Islamic, you know, and that lands us to the beginning of my interaction with Christian faith.
Okay, so you go from Iran to India to Singapore to Malaysia. You get to Malaysia and you go to church, and then what happens after that? What how does translating going to church translate to you becoming like a Christian? What how did that all happen?
Yeah. So what happened is that I started going to church. Obviously, my first desire was like, well, let me go there, let me see what's going on, and just see another religion. And probably a couple of people invited me, and insisted on going. I was like, okay, I can go. And so there I met a pastor and a friend later who was very influential in my life. And so he was basically talking very differently about God, because I knew that, and I say this in the sense of more of a worldview, but it was a systematic religion in my mind, a defined systematically um, mm, rational meaning for God that I saw in the religion of my country, which was Islam. And then I saw almost a version um, of universalism of Islam in Baha'ism. And so and by the way, I will later open on that, because probably that relates to a tiny bit different part of the story. But so that's where it came to. Everything started falling into place. Up until this point, everything was almost not organized in the way in my life. And then I started talking to David, and he was a pastor, very nice, and very different in his approach. He lived in many different countries as a missionary. He was involved with Middle Eastern missions, not necessarily my context, but he knew some of this stuff. So then he actually, which was very helpful, he started talking to me about some of this stuff, and then handed me a Bible and said, you know what, go and read this Bible, come and we can talk about it. And so I started reading the Bible. The real problem started with the Bible. I started reading the book, and as I was reading, I could see that part of that, okay, this is Middle East. This does make sense. Some of the questions are just answered. I'm reading from the Gospel of Matthew, and all the way when I got um, to the Galatians, to the book of Galatians, I could not understand why my worldview was upside down, and that was a complete encounter with something that I would say challenged my mind and challenged everything. Up until that point, I thought I know every philosophical system. I have encountered all different religions. I have seen Islam close up. I have seen Baha'ism from my grandparents. I have seen New Age stuff because my mom is a yoga teacher, and I experienced those things. And I was actually, I think, below 10 years old when I attended transcendental meditation stuff from my mom, things. So you can imagine what kind of messed up my mind was. And I still think if it wasn't for God's grace, nobody could save someone like me. It's just unredeemable, but definitely God's work. So in that sense, Galatians was literally where God cornered me, because everything in philosophy told me that religion is about control, controlling the masses. Well, Galatians was absolutely counter that idea, and everything in the religion of the society was and I'm saying this not just because of Islam, but because of everything I encountered in my society. I encountered Zoroastrian as well, and Bahai as well as Islam, but everything there was about something that you need to do in order to a chain of a strive to go and get closer to God. But then Galatians was an absolute, completely different picture of that. I could not reconcile. How is this man made for controlling of masses. And I could not answer that because it is not. And it was counter to everything I believed, everything I saw about religion. So I couldn't do anything. And the more I read, the more I looked at the arguments that Apostle Paul is making in Galatians, the more problematic it was for me because there was so much truth there, so much freedom there. And so it says it was for freedom that Christ set you free. I'm like,
Yeah.
wait a second, for freedom, not for himself, even for freedom, Christ set you free. Stand firm and therefore do not become again a slave of, put the burden of slavery or something like that. And so
Slave of the law. Yep.
correct. So that was really profound to everything I believed, and it was a radical change in my heart. I and obviously talking to David, David did his thing. He picked up a piece of paper and draw a circle and said, "Imagine this is all the knowledge in the world." And I was like, yes. And then he said, all right, so do you think you have it all? I was like, no, I do not think I know everything in the world. And then he said, then how do you know if there's no God? And that immediately destroyed my atheism because it's a valid argument. Do you know everything? And if not, then how do you know that, if you're not exhaustively capable of knowledge in the world, and how do you know if there's no God? So I couldn't be an atheist anymore, but the journey pushed me, and the book of Galatians basically cornered me to become Christian and to encounter Christianity for me was to understand the and something that actually didn't happen overnight, but understanding of gospel came through stages and perhaps in a journey that I understood deeper and deeper the goodness of the message of the gospel and the freedom that comes at least strongly portrayed in the book of Galatians. So I would always say Galatians made me Christian in a sense,
Hmm.
So yeah.
So when you talk about David, are you talking about our David, or are you talking about another David?
No, it's
Uh,
David Ginter. Yeah, it's another pastor. Yeah, that was another David. Yeah.
okay.
Um,
So you're in Malaysia. God saves you. What do you do next?
Yeah. So what happened is that I obviously we started working. That's about 2008, right? So we started studying, working, learning, constant conversations with people. We had a very strong ministry here in KL. We were having baptisms from all different nationalities and people. Some of them would be so sensitive. I don't want to even mention that, but they were so amazing times that people would come and really see this phenomenon. That is the freedom of gospel. Basically, it is really, to me, it is the gift of reconciliation that is powerful. But so I started working with David, and David in 2010 he looked at me and said, Sam, I want you to start leading the Iranian group in our church. And I was like, no, 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 you don't want me to do that. I am not the right guy. I came from a very bad background. I have atheism at my shoulders. I have, a lot of things happened in my life that made me definitely not good. And he, in his loving way, Dave looked at me and saying, "That's exactly why I want you to lead because you know the other sides, and that's okay." And so I started searching for ways to study masters and so that was the beginning of the journey of which ended up having two masters of theology, and then we launched the Iranian ministry 2011, and first off, obviously under the church and growing it until coming to a place where it can be more independent or something like that. So now we have an Iranian church here in Kuala Lumpur, and we cherish this small congregation that in this congregation, everybody comes from Iranian background, which is either Muslim, or my background is just the only one that is Bahai background. Now, another nugget of this story would be the time of my encounter with my father, understanding and learning how I became Christian, because that was a very interesting point. My father is actually a poet. He's having a family line of poets and all of that. But when he came to Malaysia for the first time. That's about, I think, 2011 or something like that. After a very long time, I was not very close with him at that time, and all of those things. And so he came to Malaysia, and as I'm driving to the airport, my prayer in my heart is, God, I just don't want I just don't want him to say anything negative or wrong about you, because I know how he can sarcastically talk about religion. I just don't want that. That's all I'm asking. I'm not even asking for him to be saved or become Christian. My expectations were low, and so driving to the airport, picked him up. Driving back, he looked at me and said, "Sam, you have changed." And I said, "Yeah, life is difficult. My hair is, going, so I'm changing a little." And he looked at me in his wonderful way, and he said, "No, in a good way." In my heart, I was like, "Hallelujah! Something really amazing happening." I'll just make it very short. In
No,
10
please
days.
talk. This is good. No, it's very interesting.
All right. So the smaller version is that in 10 days, uh, I'm in the we are in one of the ladies in the church is having a prayer meeting in her house, and I'm going, and I'm suggesting, Dad, I'm going to a prayer meeting. You're welcome to join us, or you can stay back, and that's okay too. And he said he wants to come, and so we are at the prayer meeting. I was standing somewhere near the kitchen, and just I think talking to somebody else. And from the corner of my eyes, something, sometimes when something happens, you feel like you gotta look. And I turned and looked, and I still cannot believe my eyes. My dad was on his knees, and he was praying with somebody else. And that is the gift. I'm like, wait a second, how is this gonna happen? How would such a thing would ever happen? Because remember, at that time he was like 72 years old. Now he's 80, I don't know, 85, going to 86 this year. And so he became Christian, but I never shared the gospel with my father. So that is one of the most amazing things. And so what he told me and told everyone, he said, "Man, the God who changed my son in such way, I believe in him." And I think that's just a testimony to the greatness of God, that can change sinners like Sam, because that is true. I promise a lot of my atheist friends would probably listen to this and laugh and say, "I know the atheist guy, only I don't know the rest of the story." But that is true. And so when he became Christian, that was the time that I really saw the true face of Baha'ism. And that was not very pleasant, because when my dad, for uh, probably 50 years, he was alcoholic, and he was gambling and all of that. Nobody had problem with him, and nobody wanted to challenge him on anything. He did those things for his own whatever, and he was drinking every night, and regular gambling and all of those things. But when he became Christian, his own brother was very upset with it, and he said, "If you wanted a religion, you should have come to your own religion." And
Hmm.
and and I looked at my uncle. He came to visit us here, and I looked at him and said, "But he is a child of God now." He said, "No, Sam, he cannot be a godly man. I am only a godly man who lived a godly life. Nobody who lived a bad life can be godly." And I looked at him back and I said, that's the difference. Christianity is a second chance for many people who probably like me messed up many times, and they can still find that they can redeem what they have, not in some ways of a self-righteousness, but in a way, a chance to start anew and chances to start a different path and a different life. So changing the lens of worldviews, it was very interesting. Baha'ism told me for many years that it's universalist. Everybody's going to be the same, and everybody's making it to heaven, and God is a universalist. But that was not necessarily true, and I saw another side of that. And it is an interesting story, not because of that side, but because Christianity was something, and I know Christians are probably the biggest problem with Christianity, but the Bible is the best thing that we have about Christianity, I think, and that's where we have the wisdom of not looking at the broken people like me and say, oh, you're full of all sorts of flaws and all sorts of shortcomings, uh, but the truth is lying in that redemptive, freeing uh, truth of the gospel that sets you free, so that you can now take a different path in reconciliation with God.
Hmm. It's a wonderful testimony about how your father came to faith in Christ, not by really anything that you said, but just by observing how your life had been changed. Hmm. That's a wonderful story, and that's something that is very much a reminder to all of us, right? I mean, God changes our lives, and if He changes our lives and He causes us to believe, that's going to be manifested in our interactions, whether we realize it or not. That's a very opportune and appropriate way of viewing things. I very appreciate you talking about that. I want to change up gears a little bit, and I want to ask you about um, most people that are listening or watching this are from the West and are Americans, and they have a different view or a warped view of Iran and Iranians, and many of them are scared of Iranians. What would you tell them about Iran that help alleviate some of those misconceptions?
Hmm. So I think I think one of the problems we have with the Iranian society is that it seems like everybody wants to draw a picture that is, for the most part, I don't think any of the sides are really honest about it. I have seen people from the voice that comes from inside the Iran wants to picture a united community and the nation that is absolutely behind the Islamic agenda of the Islamic government of Iran. That is absolutely far from what is happening in the streets of Iran. But also we have some people in the side of activism and those things, and they want to portray an Iran that is absolutely filled with all the open-minded people, and they're just kept there for the other side. But I think if we want to be honest, we have a very confusing, and rightly use the word confusing, blend there, because it is confusing. And sometimes we want to simplify so that we know exactly. Sam, give me one sentence line that I would know, and so with that one sentence I can decode and decrypt every Iranian situation. Well, unfortunately, the answer is more complex than that. And that is the problem, because a lot of different areas have different mentalities and have different ideas. You see, I was born in 80s and 90s. I mean, born and grow up in 80s and 90s in Tehran, and I ended up watching MTV and becoming an atheist and listening to rock music and all of those things in my own time. connected to some other different values. Whereas you can find just about maybe few kilometers from where I was living, people who were very different in the worldviews and very different with what they practiced. So I can tell you one thing about Iranian people. The nation is divided over these two major poles. Now, the poles of identity or the shared identity of communities are either you identify more as a Muslim, or Islam is your primary source of identity or community, or you live and understand or seek at least something outside of that standard, and perhaps identify as Iranian or Persian. You want to be in a different side of the spectrum. So when that happens, you would see people easily trying to signal to you that they are from the great Persian Empire. So a very simple test is that you can ask them, what is the greatest king of Iran? Who's the greatest king in Iran? And they can tell you where they do they land on based on those things. And if they tell you Cyrus, or I don't know, or the Pahlavi dynasty, you can easily understand they're landing on the more open to West side of the argument. Or if they choose Islam, they're more skeptical towards it. But one thing is very important about the Iranians, and that is, I think we love our own opinion, and I think we are very strong on it. So if we tell you this, it's not such a it's not very simple. We are very strong in that. So we would try to argue and tell you, no, everybody in the country is like that, and we want to convince you that everybody thinks like this. But if you're having a different lens, you might be able to see both sides of the spectrum. As I was talking to a friend just about a few days ago, I asked him, "Who do you think voted 20 million for such and such president in the previous, time in Iran?" He said, "No, no, no, those are all fake and stuff like that." I'm like, I don't think so. There are some people. There are some people who go there. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with them, obviously, because this is a very sensitive area. I don't want. I mean, usually when I put myself in this middle, I create enough disagreement with both sides of the spectrum. I want to make sure that I'm not supporting any of those sides. But this is the reality of the society, and that is the challenge we have. So the question is, where is really Iran? I would tell you it goes case by case. People are different, and the country has been divided for a very long time, and that division has been hurting us for a very, very long time.
Hmm. Okay. Let me ask you this question. What's one thing in your ministry that you know now in your ministry that you wished you would have known when you started?
Oh, that that is a great question. So I can tell you, um, when we started ministry with Iranian people, um, I was I was very different in my approach. I think understanding that people come and this complexity of um, the background of people in Iran is very important. Iran is, in terms of nation, I believe that Iranians are having one nation, and that is true. It's very difficult to get an Iranian who wants to separate the country or is for those kind of divisions. But if you look at this nation, you still see a lot of different worldviews and cultures and subcultures in subcultures. So that makes it very complex. And I think if I want to say something to a person who started this ministry in 2011, I would say, observe the culture better than you do. And that is very, very important. Observe the culture before you come to the picture. One of the things I would say, and this is perhaps helpful, in some ways. I'm but I'm yeah, I'm just going to say it. So different approach to understanding culture. I know, like, when we do a study in culture, some people say, look, this culture is like a circle, that one is like a square, and then we are connecting these, and then this is how a culture goes to another culture. This is how we transfer truth to this way and that way. And that is how we are targeting for cultural understanding. Um, to me, to create an abstract out of culture is to butcher it, literally. And so I would say, in very strong sense, I have made this mistake for many years. And I thought, oh, this is the gospel, this is the vessel of culture, attached together, make sure screwed strong enough, and then drop the bomb. It's not going to work. What worked for us what worked for us is to observe and listen to the sound. And I think when we talk about even shame and honor, or any of those categorizing systems that we want to do, I want to bring this up and say, maybe Iranian culture is like a poem. So you do not understand it unless you sit down and listen to it, and you try to relate to it, because it can be understood if you are listening to the way of communication. It's not reductible to abstracts that are simplified. And then once you simplify that abstract, you can easily transfer and bring it. So perhaps you need to learn to sing or read the rhythm, or the rhyme of the Iranian heart. So how do you connect that, Sam? If I'm talking to Sam in 2011, starting the ministry, I would say, listen to what rhymes with the heart of Iranians, and then in the beats, in the sequence, you might be able to bring in the goodness of gospel and place it there as you are listening, and then you can add that to the rhythm.
Mm, that's a good word. So let me ask you this question then: if you were to, many of the people that are listening are seminary students or are thinking about going to seminary. If you could give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
Sure. So again, when you're working as a missionary, or as you are aiming to go to nations, this is very important to understand the culture. This is very important to understand the target. I always say this, and for the lack of better illustration, it's as if you are an archer and trying to aim to shoot at something and target something. I think you definitely need to know your bow and arrow, and you need to know archery, and you need to know all the art of what you're doing. But also, you need to be able to aim the right place in your target. Otherwise, you won't make it. You won't make a real cut. So what is very important is this again. This is my observation. A lot of times, uh, connection is key. We need connection, but the connection only happens when you build true trust, and trust comes from very different levels. Sometimes we have, and I understand, because I'm working with missionaries and brothers who want to serve the Lord. Sometimes missionaries come with a hovering spaceship, and they don't want to land there. They want to stay on top, and because they need to protect their own lives and families, and that's absolutely right. But there is a place where you need to turn off the engine, land, and make the connection, so that you are able to connect. And I think, if that is the part that we are looking. But if you're looking at the Iranian culture, mm, this is the line. Iranian culture is very strong in terms of bringing you in. We want, every time we look at someone in our culture, in some ways, like, how can we adopt this person to our own community? And you perhaps you experience that in the field more. And so people will be very welcoming, very warm in terms of hospitality, in terms of community love, and those things. But let not that stop you from seeking to peel off the layers of character that needs to be peeled off. You see, Sam, as an example, was born, raised in all these different scenarios, and each of that was like a layer, was just another layer in my character that I needed to peel off, and the true good encounter with the Word of God that would let me sit down, because as long as somebody is there, and I'm concerned with with impressing that person. But if that person is not there, I am faced with the truth and the reality of the Bible. Then I have a better chance of seeing and facing the problem that is there.
Great. That's a good word, Sam. Thank you so much for just talking to us for a little bit. I appreciate your time, and just blessings on your ministry. And I look forward to your PhD getting complete. I think that's going to be a pretty important project. I'm looking forward to that being done, as I'm sure you are as well.
Correct. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful.